Yep. 90 for the pair. Anyway,
All right, are we
ridiculous.
ready to
I
get this rolling, do you
I
think?
think we are. I'll do a quick intro here while everybody's still piling in. We still got people coming in on YouTube. We still got people coming in directly into Session Wire Studio. Thanks everybody for joining today. Very excited to facilitate this pilot event with Plugin Alliance. Thank you, Charles, for joining us from Plugin Alliance. Charles, product specialist located in the U.S. We have Martin in the chat, who's joining us all the way from Germany as well. He's been a big part of putting this together. And we have Craig Bauer and Anthony Resta, who are the creatives behind this music that we're about to hear. So thanks, everybody, for joining.
Can I jump in real quick? Because I like to
Absolutely.
make these kind of things perfectly clear. Plugin Alliance did not ask me to do this. I asked you to do this with me, and then we asked Plugin Alliance to join in. So
Mm-hmm.
I literally want people to know that this is not a sales pitch from Plugin Alliance. This is me telling you how unbelievably great this compressor is. It has nothing to do with them trying to talk me into doing this to sell compressors. I like to say that because I think a lot of people assume that it's the other way around.
Yeah.
This one, that is not the case.
But also, it is kind of a sales pitch because you should go buy the plugin because it's awesome. It's great. Or the AMEC, you know, like we're going to dig
Well,
into.
you get the mega bundle and be done with it is really what it boils down to.
Exactly. Just before we get in here, Juno's asking if the session will be available for playback. Yes, it should be on YouTube, and we're planning on, you know, kind of cutting things up and posting little clips of things at some point down the road, I think. Okay, so yeah, Craig, if you wouldn't mind just kind of introducing the song and what we're going to be listening and Anthony's involvement.
Yes,
Great.
I would love to do that. First of all, I'm going to tell everybody that I work in Pro Tools and I have an Avid S6 behind me, and that is my workflow. I personally can't work without a control surface because I'm very hands-on with faders. So people should know that. And before we start talking about the actual products here, I think it's really important for people first to understand that any plugin that you use has to be done with intention. You don't just I don't just randomly pick compressors or EQs or anything and just stick it on there as a matter of course and try to get the loudest thing possible. Everything that I do and everything that anyone does when they're working on records is have intention. And so what you're about to hear is something that has been very carefully been worked and paid attention to, and everything in here has a lot of intention. And this is where I'm going to introduce Anthony Resta, who is one of the most unbelievable producers and creatives that I have ever worked with. And we've known each other probably for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years maybe.
Yep.
And have done a ton of work together only because I keep sending people to him, frankly.
Yeah.
It's just incredible stuff, and you're going to hear that. And we came up with this tune to remix together with something that he had done a long time ago. And when I decided to do this, I needed to find a song. It was going to be difficult to get an artist where I'm working on something brand new to do this over Session Wire before it was released. So that's part of the reason why this tune was picked. But I'm going to introduce Anthony here and let him tell you about this song, what it is, what the lyrics are about, what the intention is, and what the goal of this mix was. So everybody meet Anthony.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. It's an honor to be here. Craig always makes me blush with his kind words. This particular song is called Temporary, and it was a song I wrote with Donna DeLore, who is well known for touring with Madonna for decades, and she's a session singer. She's been on countless hits on stage and in the studio. But we wrote the song. It's really slow. It's 60 beats per minute. I was really influenced a lot by the trip hop era, Massive Attack and Tricky and Portishead and all that. And it's a dreamy song. It's almost like it's about our relationship with people that have been on the planet and left. So it's really kind of a spiritual feeling. It's, you know, everything is temporary, and you know, others' footsteps have walked where we have walked. And sometimes you might lean against a tree and think about those who have come before us and, you know, what they experienced. So it's a really kind of deep, dark song. And being so slow, it was very difficult to mix because I wanted it to have a lot of dynamics and take you on an emotional roller coaster, but I really wanted to update the sound and make it less like lo-fi retro and more like something that could sit with modern music. And Craig is one of the best at doing that. You know, his track record obviously shows that. So I loaded up the session and I sent it to him. And then I went to Denver, and we had a great time for 2 days. And then he's taken it even further. So you guys are going to witness the whole thing come together.
So the real trick was, as Anthony just mentioned, was how to have something that sounds very current and has frankly, the level pre-mastering that people expect these days without losing the dynamics. And that's where this plugin comes in. It is unbelievably good at getting a good amount of level with, and I hate to use this word, but it's going to be used a number of times throughout the course of this, and that is the word glue. Because frankly, it is the best name for this plugin because there are numerous ways to use this plugin to provide glue in a mix that I have not achieved with other plugins. And of course, we're going to explain and I'm going to demonstrate that stuff. Before we get into any talking about the tech stuff, I think we should play a little bit of, obviously, the mix so you guys can get a little bit familiar with the song. I'm going to play a verse, and then I'm going to skip over to the end of a bridge, and then play a little bit of the vamp so you can hear the difference in the dynamics from the bridge to the end where the song gets really big, but not crushed in a way where it just loses the emotion of it. So let's just do that. I'm going to start at the second verse here.
And sorry, wait for the tail. There we go. I've got auto mute on here, so I just have to wait for that reverb tail, which sounds wonderful. Would you mind sharing your screen as well?
Oh, yeah. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I don't know. Possibly.
I'm hitting share screen.
Rob Hansen, you said no sound. Make sure your HQ audio destination is set to something that you can hear audio from, and you'll hear it. If you can hear our voices, set your HQ audio destination to that same device. Try your screen share again, Craig, and do the entire screen.
Did I get kicked out?
Nope.
Oh.
You're still here.
Okay. Hit entire screen. Mm-hmm. There we go.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Now are we seeing my screen?
We are.
Still hearing me?
Wonderful.
All right. Second verse. We good?
Good.
An innocent child asks, what is the future past? Does anyone really know what time means? I lean on this old tree, dreaming of those who came.
The bridge and play into the last hook.
Nothing, something, nothing, to everything.
of what the song sounds like, and I would assume everyone got a sense of how big the vamp got as compared to the bridge and the second verse there. So let's get into BX Glue a little bit. Let's just describe some of the parameters here. Obviously, it's a compressor, so it has the typical ratio over here, threshold, attack, and release. And it has an auto release. And as you can see, we get a visual of the amount of gain reduction displayed. And one thing that I would like to sort of immediately jump on when it comes to mix bus compression is on my mixes, we're talking about a 1 to 2 dB maximum amount of gain reduction. So I'm not crushing the crap out of everything that's happening here, which is why the dynamics actually work really well. And one of the reasons this compressor is so great. If you know anything about this compressor yet, it's basically a 2-band compressor. So you can split the low end and the high end independently of each other by taking this band link and start pulling this down. And then you can see this crossover point come up. And then you can drag the crossover point from left to right to decide where those bands are going to be split. One of the tricky things about that is to figure out where that band split should happen. And the only answer to that question is it's completely program dependent and depends on the song and how much low end there is or how much high end there is. And it's got an auto listen function, so you can basically listen to where the point is in a little bit of the area around the two bands to figure that out. I'm going to jump back to on the mix bus. In this particular mix, I'm not splitting the band, so it's acting just like a single band compressor like most. What makes this plugin really special for me is when you do split the bands, you get a band tilt, which basically favors one band over the other as far as gain, so high end versus low end, which we can demonstrate on another track after we get through the mix bus here. And there's a couple of other tonal variations which allow me in a mix to make very small adjustments if I want small adjustments to the tonality of the mix, which is done down here with this emphasis control. Describing this is a little bit more tricky than actually listening to it, but basically what it does is the very first thing that happens in this plugin is the signal goes into this emphasis control where you tell it to either emphasize, pre-emphasize certain frequencies or a band of frequencies or de-emphasize them. And then on the back end, at the end of the chain in the plugin, it makes up that gain. What that really means for in using this plugin is it ultimately ends up as a tonal control. So you can make very small adjustments to the low end by the tilt function up and down this way, as you can see this go up and down that way. And when it's up, it's hitting it harder. And so low end is being decreased here. Low end is being increased here. And there's also a tub setting, which basically emphasizes either the middle or de-emphasizes the middle and emphasizes the bottom and the top. It's unbelievably useful. So I think it's important for people to kind of understand my signal flow in a mix situation where it's like, well, what do you set first? Are you dealing with limiters first? Is the compressor in from the very beginning? Are EQs in? It's one of the things I've talked about in various mix bus workshops before. The answer to that question is I basically have no EQ in at the top of the mix because I'm building the mix from top to bottom. So EQ on the mix bus isn't there. I do have the compressor in from the very beginning, and it's set with very sort of generalized settings. My standard situation for a mix bus compressor is a 2-to-1 ratio. I get a rough mix first, and I kind of set the general levels and the amount of gain reduction, looking for a maximum of 1.5 to 2 dB. In this one, I think it's only 1 dB of gain reduction. That's how my mixes start every single time, is with some sort of easy generalized setting, and then that gets developed over the course of the mix because I'm constantly keeping an eye on it. So by the time I get to the end of the mix, all the sounds are there. Before I start a bunch of automation, this is baked in by the time I get to that juncture within a mix. With a lot of Plugin Alliance plugins, you get the stereo and stereo width in the mono maker. I'm not using that in this plugin, as in with pretty much most compressors. There's also a sidechain section here, which should be familiar to most people. Internal sidechain, where there's a high pass filter that will tell the plugin not to start doing any compression based on low end. And then there's the external sidechain, where you can use the key input up here. So another track, a kick drum or a bass, can be used to sidechain and basically control how the plugin is being implemented. And then lastly, this set of tone controls, which is saturation and a couple of options for transformers. So between the two bands and then the tilt function here, the emphasis, which is tonal control, and then the saturation and the transformers, the amount of sound design that you can do on this one plugin, especially on a mix bus, is just mind-boggling. I have never used a mix bus plugin that gives me so many options for designing the way the mix bus compression is working. And it sounds like, well, if you have that many options, how do you know where do you start? How do you know where to end up? At that point, I would tell you that I'm making subtle adjustments across the mix bus throughout the course of the mix from beginning to end. So by the time I get to the end of the mix, adjustments that happen here are fairly small little things. To really get to that point, I'm going to go back to my preset here. I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to go to this vamp here, and we're going to just play with some parameters here so we can see and hear the variation that can happen within this plugin. The first thing I'm going to do is play the mix, and we're going to turn off the little bit of saturation and one of the transformers here. I'm going to play the mix and turn them off while we're working here so you can hear what's happening while we're playing the mix.
And
To be free, and this too shall pass, fading photographs, all is to me so temporary. The thrills and
there, and the transformer between being on and off is not subtle. I can't imagine this particular mix having it off. It was baked in much earlier in the process. If you take the tone to the dirtier, more gritty, severe saturation, we can check out what that sounds like. But before we do that, let's just listen to the two different transformers alone.
and this too shall pass, fading photographs, all is to me so temporary. The thrills and the pain for what will remain, all we see so temporary.
Unbelievable amount of tonal control in a mix situation on the mix bus.
so if I can jump in for a second here really quick, just for everybody that's watching on YouTube, you may not be picking up the subtleties of what's going on here. It's very subtle what Craig is kind of demonstrating. And for those of you watching in Session Wire, you should be picking up on this because that's what Session Wire is for. So for everybody watching on YouTube, if you can't hear the differences, when we do future events, you're going to either want to sign up for a mega bundle or, I don't know, make friends with somebody at Plugin Alliance so you can get the link and be in Session Wire for the next one. Just wanted to tag on to that. And somebody had a quick question. Did this plugin replace Unisum on your master bus?
Yes.
Right. There you go.
We're not here to talk about other plugins, but as long as someone's asking that question, the answer is yes. I spent a lot of time working with this plugin and A/Bing between various things, and without a doubt, there is nothing that this is doing or any other compressor is doing better than this is doing on anything. So the simple answer to that question is yes, it did. The other thing that is important to mention is that this plugin, for all the tonal variation that you can get out of it, is wildly simple to use. There's no other way to say it. It's basically a few different tonal parameters, three different tonal parameters, and figuring out what the right ratio and threshold is. On my mix bus, I never go more than a ratio of 2-to-1 because I'm not doing drastic stuff there. So again, if you're on YouTube and you can't hear these differences, then just buy the plugin. One, there's a pretty hard sales pitch. You will not regret it. That's pretty simple. Let's play with the emphasis at this point and just hear what the tonal differences that can happen there are, because that is not subtle if we go to extreme. So I'm going to go back to where we were from the beginning here, and we will play with the pre-emphasis both in tilt mode and in tub mode. Tub is really interesting, and I had it there. I couldn't decide between the two, and like I said, this mix, getting to this point in this mix has been a fairly ongoing adventure. I'm absolutely at the point where I don't want to change a thing, but we will listen to what this does. In the tub mode, if you've got a mix that's a little mid-range heavy, tub is perfect because you can then accentuate highs and lows and kind of back off the mid-range, which I'm repeating myself. I don't know any other way to say it other than the amount of control is just staggering and simple to do. The hardest part about it is it's nearly impossible to make this plugin sound bad. That's the hardest part I've had about working on this mix with this plugin. But let's stop talking.
And then after you're done, I have questions for Charles because I'm gonna drag him into this conversation after you're done this demo.
Okay.
And this too shall pass, fading photographs, all is to me so temporary. The thrills and the pain for what will. And this too shall pass, fading photographs, all is to me.
Oh, hold on a sec. There we go. Yeah, that reverb tail takes a while to come off, so you just have to.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Have to hang on a second for the auto mute to let go.
Well, and then everybody should know that reverb tail is coming from BX Aura. As long as we're talking about a reverb tail, that's where that's coming from. We'll get to that.
Okay, so we got a bunch of questions. Just everybody's asking questions. This is great. I'm going to save some of those questions for the last part of this.
Okay.
The last 30 minutes of this thing are kind of reserved for Q&A. But I want to ask Charles, to put you on the spot. What was Plugin Alliance's impetus for coming up with this plugin? What was the inspiration for this? And, why are these specific tools a part of this plugin?
Yeah. So Brainworks has sort of been on a track of creating, products that fill a need in different areas. And with BX Glue, they wanted a VCA compressor that has all of these more modern features that you may want when mastering, for example. And as Craig has said, it really fills a lot of these various needs that he has when mixing tracks. So I think it was just a culmination of different wants all plugged into a single product, and that's sort of the one of the design approaches that Brainworks has been taking lately, and I think for quite a while with the products that they've been putting out. Amazing.
That's awesome. And, for everybody asking about price, go hit the Plugin Alliance website and, check out the mega bundles. I believe Glue comes in a couple of those bundles. Is that correct?
Yes. So, well, I don't want to say that off the top of my head. It's in the mega plan, whichever one you get. It's part of that.
And if you're a sucker like me and you go and buy a bunch of, Plugin Alliance, I'm not a sucker. I love Plugin Alliance plugins. I'll just say that. If you go and buy a bunch of plugins, you'll find that you'll get emails almost every day with discount codes, and you can apply those towards any plugins to own perpetually. And before you know it, you'll have every Plugin Alliance plugin in your library. So yeah, sign up for Plugin Alliance. Go buy some plugins. There's always sales. There's always discount codes. It's pretty easy to stock up on plugins.
Right. Let's before we go into a couple of questions, I want to demonstrate the tub part of this emphasis section here, because we didn't get to that yet. So let's switch to here and just hear the difference between the tilt and the tub.
And this too shall pass, fleeting photographs, all is to me, so temporary, the thrills and the pain, for what will remain, all we see.
At all, and it just is I don't know. Let's go. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but go ahead. Let's ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
I'm there's so much to get to here that
we talked about this 90 minutes flies by, so
Yes.
we might have to schedule another one of these sometime and dig into specific aspects of mixed bus processing, and that's a whole series of events in itself. Couple of questions here. Foxtron Studio asks, is there a limiter on your mix bus?
the answer is yes, and it is Ozone, so I don't have to feel bad about talking about some other company's plugin. I've been using Ozone forever. So yes, there is. What I want to do, let's do this real quick before we even continue answering that. Let's bypass so we can hear the difference with it in and with it out.
Great.
And this too shall pass, fleeting photographs, all is to me, so temporary.
It's remarkable. There is 2 dB. It's only about a maximum of 1 dB of gain reduction. There's 2 dB of makeup gain. So I'm actually adding, outside of the gain reduction, I'm actually adding 1 dB that's heading into an EQ, which we'll get to because I definitely want to get to that, and then into Ozone. Ozone is not being slammed at all either. And I can also tell you that the maximum gain or in LUFS of this entire mix is averaging between -10 and -9. I am not a guy who is shooting for -7 on mixes. All my mixes going to a mastering engineer. I am not of the make it as loud as you possibly friggin' can. I make it so that it's plenty loud to send to mastering and dynamics are retained. And I think everyone should think about their mixes from that standpoint, not about how loud they can make them. Music is not meant to be one level, one solid block. That is not interesting to listen to, especially with a track like this. So yes, that is important to mention there. Now let's continue with some questions now that we've heard it with it in and with it bypassed.
Sure. And just to tag on to that, is it you usually have this plugin fully wet, 100% wet, or do you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Figured.
Because the amount of gain reduction is so little in all of my mixes on the mix bus. It's not true everywhere up the chain where I have other things that if we have time, I'd love to get to, especially some of these little drum fills that Anthony programmed, where there's low end and high end, where we can hear what the band split actually does, which would be interesting to do. So hopefully we'll get to that. As far as whether or not the mix is fully wet, there have been mixes where it's not, but it's never like 50-50. If I back it off at all, it's, maybe 90, 85. So when in previous times when I've had to sort of rebalance how much compression is happening on the mix bus, it's generally because tonally I couldn't get it where I wanted it to be, which is when I would start backing it off. With this, I can design any sound that I want and tonally get the balance between low end and high end so perfect that it's just not necessary to use a wet dry balance. That in consideration with I'm not doing a ton of gain reduction. If there was a ton of gain reduction, there might be more of a need to sort of adjust the wet dry balance.
Got it. And to tag on to that, when you send your track off, are you sending it at -9 to 10 LUFS to the mastering engineer, or do you
Yes.
You are okay.
No, I don't remove anything. That is what gets sent because the mixes are still dynamic, as hopefully everyone can hear here.
And that's why we love you. That's why we love you. Don't mess with the dynamics.
And now if I could just get my wife to agree with you.
No comment.
Yeah,
Okay,
go on.
so yeah, I think that. Oh, here's a. Okay, this could go deep. So we'll try to keep the. Not that it's not that you're talking too much, but this could go on forever. Like literally, this is like a deep question. When you change the emphasis while mixing, don't you have to go to all the tracks to remix frequency areas?
No, that's the point of this. So because of what I'm doing is so unbelievably subtle, the reason I would add something like this, it's at the very end of the mix. And it's just experimenting. Well, what happens if I put a little bit of tilt, this tiny little bit of tilt, which is just bringing out just enough high end where you go, oh, this is a breath of fresh air. And it's improving the mix this last 5% or 10, not even 10, where it's just adding that last tiny little bit amount where there is improvement without having to go back and working backwards. So again, this is why what you're seeing here is such little tiny adjustments on the mix bus, because if I started doing anything drastic, then yes, of course, I would have to start working backwards and fixing a bunch of stuff. So it's not about that at all. This is completely about subtlety to me, and in small increments, that is just doing enough improvement there where you take it away, you bypass it, and the mix just doesn't feel right anymore.
Amazing. Great. I love it. Okay, so I have just checking some questions here.
Okay, and I do have to absolutely have to demonstrate one more thing in this plugin before we get into a ton of questions. But go ahead and ask one more, and then we'll do that.
Charles,
I got a question.
Yeah, go, Charles.
Ask one. So I think a lot of producers that look at this plugin are going to be familiar with like most of the controls, threshold, attack, release. Those are pretty common. The emphasis section specifically is pretty unique. to this product. You see something similar on certain hardware compressors and that type of thing, but it is sort of a more unique feature. What are some use cases, some specific use cases, Craig, where you would reach for that to solve a certain problem? Like if you hear, X problem, what is the emphasis section solving?
I'm going to demonstrate that very clearly when we get to talking about the EQs that are on the mix bus here. And we can get to that because it's going to become very clear very quickly.
Okay.
So let's hold on to that for a second. One more.
Okay.
And then I want to get to the attack and release.
Sure. Yeah. And I no more questions. And then you wanted to show some things with the vocal.
I've got it. There's so much stuff. This can go on for 4 hours if we wanted to.
Okay. Let's quickly.
There's so much great information here. I'm sorry to say. Let me talk about this attack and release real quick.
Okay.
Because this is actually one of the again so powerful in a subtle way, but unbelievably powerful in the subtlety. I have this on auto release right now. I'm going to demonstrate, and all of my mix bus compression is slow attack, and then and in the past it's been fast release. With BX Glue, when I turn on auto release, the word glue is going to come into play unlike any other compressor I have ever used before. In any other mix bus compressor that I've ever used, it's always been slow attack, fast release in a way to retain transients. So we're going to demonstrate the difference between having auto release on and off. And this is where the word glue could not be more apparent. There's something about the auto release in this particular compressor that, I hate to do it again, glues the mix together in such an unbelievably pleasing way where you're not losing transients. However, when I turn auto release off and start playing with the release parameter here, you're going to hear the mix. I don't want to use the word fall apart because it doesn't fall apart, but it becomes more open and it becomes less glued. Let's just play it and experiment with that, and you'll hear what I'm talking about.
And this too shall pass, fleeting photographs, all is to be so temporary. The thrills and the pain for what will remain.
It's giving it, I don't want to use the word mastered in the sense that you don't need to be mastering your mixes after this, but it gives it this sort of mastered sound without it being overdone, that ties everything together so beautifully that I can't imagine not using it. Any other way to put that? I don't think so. It's one of those things that in your mixes, you just have to experiment. And when you turn that on, it just comes together in a way that you could spend hours and hours messing with other things in your mix, messing with other parameters and other compressors, God forbid. That saves an unbelievable amount of time without overdoing some sort of mastering type of sound, but gluing the mix together that I just can't imagine not having this anymore.
Amazing. There's your plug. Okay. So I know we were going to look at this on the vocal, but somebody is specifically asking about Aura.
Sure.
Are we going to be going over Aura? Would love to see how you used it.
We would like to if we have enough time.
Yeah. So I mean
theoretically, we have 15 minutes left to talk about plugins. I have to get to these EQs because I want to answer Charles' question as to why and what where does emphasis really come into play? And the answer to that is in looking at the EQs that I have on this. I tend to put an EQ before compression. I always do, but it's off at the beginning of the mix, and that doesn't come into play until much later on in the mix. And then towards the end of the mix, in the last number of years, I've always had the Maag 200 and then evolved into the 250. For a small amount of character, I have the Kirchhoff EQ, which is a parametric, highly defined, and we'll just take a look at it. So I'm taking out a little lows, and this didn't happen till later on the mix, or low mids, and a tiny bit of 10K that was built into this mix a while ago. And then later on in the mix, very much towards the end, this gets added, which is just putting a little bit more of air on that I decided to do. So this entire mix was done originally with this combination of plugins: the Kirchhoff, BX Glue, and then the Maag added very much towards the end for that tiny little extra bit of air that's been put on top.
And I'd like to point out how tiny you're talking about.
Tiny.
Look at the dB knobs. Look at the boost and cut knobs.
Yeah, so where there's a little bit more EQ happening here and taking out some low mids and a little bit of bump here.
It's by some you're talking a dB and a half to 2 dBs, maybe.
Yes, it probably looks more dramatic than it is.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this, as a mixer, if you get to the mix bus stage and you find yourself doing 2 and 3 dB of gain reduction on 3 bands, I'm sorry to say your mix is broken. You shouldn't need to be doing massive amounts of EQ on your mix bus. And again, this looks more dramatic than it is. It's a half a dB at 150 or 160, and a half a dB, 1 dB at 10K, and half a dB at 14, just for that air way on top. So yes, you shouldn't need to be doing drastic EQ on your mix bus. Otherwise, something's broken along the chain. And then at the very end of the mix, I'm talking like in the last half hour, this gets added, experimented with and added just to see what happens if I do just a hair more. This has the Kirchhoff is very transparent. This has a little bit of color to it, which is why this gets added. Someone might say, well, why don't you just do it with the 1 EQ at the beginning? The answer to that question is because what's hitting the compressor as opposed to what you're doing after the compressor makes if you're doing it hitting the compressor, it's going to make the compressor act differently. So that's all set. So now at the very end, post compression, I'm adding this tiny bit of air at the top. So this is how the mix was completed. After the fact, well, when this mix was done, Plugin Alliance released in the middle of this mix, this Bettermaker EQ, which is definitely very much a color, tonally different kind of sound. It doesn't have tons of parameters or EQ points. There's lots of range in here, a very different kind of sound than the Kirchhoff. So I put this in beforehand, and now I'm going to spill the beans on Plugin Alliance's next EQ that's going to be released, if I'm not mistaken, Charles, on the 9th.
Good question. I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
You're seeing it here first, folks. You're seeing it here first.
You're the very first people to see the newest version of the Maag EQ. Before we even start talking about that, I've only had it for a very short period of time. So now I've got 2 different sets of EQs that I'm going to flip between. I have to stand up to do it on my console. So we're going to flip between the Kirchhoff and the Maag and switch to the Bettermaker and the new Maag. So you can hear the differences between what happens if I switch these 2 sets of EQs, which is then going to bring me back to where the emphasis will come into play with BX Glue. So let's do that real quick. Let's go back to the top of the vamp here and watch down here so you can hear and see when I'm making this switch, because I have to stand up to do it here. Cool.
And this too shall pass, fleeting photographs, all is to be so temporary. The thrills and the pain for what will remain, all we see so temporary.
Okay.
So hopefully you can hear the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to flat out admit that I worked pretty hard to get them to sound fairly close to each other on purpose. I could obviously make them sound way different between the two with the color of the Bettermaker and the definition of the new Maag. But let's circle back to the question of, well, where does emphasis come into play? If you were able to detect in this subtlety, the Bettermaker is heavier in the low mids. It has more color, and the Maag has the air band brought into it, so it's got that nice sheen on top. So we've got more weight in the bottom. We've got brighter sheen on top, way on top. And so the slight difference in the heaviness of this is where I now go back to glue and look at this emphasis, and I'm going to increase the top end of this at a very particular middle point here that resolves the problem of too much heaviness in the Bettermaker as compared to the transparency of the Kirchhoff. So that's the answer to that question. So now with this, I'm going to just add a little bit more of the top end with the emphasis and solve the problem with the heaviness, because it's going to pull back the low mids here. It's going to add a little bit. It's more about pulling the low mids back here to solve that slight difference and being slightly too heavy.
And this too shall pass, fleeting photographs, all is to be so temporary. The thrill.
Quickly. So, Charles, did that help answer that question?
I'm gonna chime in here with a little more info on it, just for anyone kind of curious about what's actually happening under the hood, because I think you did a good job of explaining, like, from an auditory perspective what's going on. But maybe we can nerd out for a minute over the under the hood details.
Do it.
Yeah, so this emphasis section, it applies a filter to the signal as it goes into the plugin. So this is applied at the very start of the signal chain, and then it runs through like the tone section. Compression is applied, the tilt filters up at the top are applied, and then at the very end you have this post emphasis, which is basically an inverse curve that's applied to compensate for the pre-emphasis. And just a very kind of clear-cut example of when you might do this in a more extreme situation, maybe not when you're really going for subtlety, is if you have a mix where the low end is like really heavy, and if you were to drive it into a compressor, it could start to distort, right? So you might see that happen where you have this really, really large bump in the low end, maybe a hip hop track, for example. And if you apply that tilt on the way in, it's actually going to omit that low end from getting hit with compression as heavily as the top end. All the processing is applied, and then you have this post emphasis that's going to bring it back up in level. So you're basically getting tight compression on the top end. Your low end remains more or less unaffected. So it's a unique way of dealing with a bottom heavy mix. You could also do it the other way, where you have basically the reverse of that, going the other direction. But that's just sort of the one of the go-to situations in my head when I think about what I've used.
You're absolutely right, and unfortunately, the subtlety of what I'm doing on the mix bus doesn't demonstrate that. A hip hop track that has a big 808 would definitely be an example where you'd want that de-emphasis going in so that it's not going into distortion on the mix bus without having to do something stupid on the 808 itself to eliminate the weight and effectiveness of what an 808 would do on the mix. That still needs to be there, but you don't want to have it distorting on the mix itself or on the mix bus.
Yep.
You did a much better job of explaining that than I did due to my subtlety here.
No, I think having your example is great as well, and showing that it's something you can use in moderation and you don't just need for these big in your face mixing problems.
Yes. So if I were to go back, and now with the change that I implemented in BX Glue by adding a little more of by taking some of the weight out down here to compensate for the Bettermaker heaviness, if I went back and used to the Kirchhoff and the Amec with the new setting here, that falls apart. So the difference between what the emphasis is doing between these two sets of EQs is absolutely critical. But I can make both of them work because of this emphasis section. And when it came time to decide, well, does the color of the Bettermaker and the combination of the new Maag EQ, is it better than the other two when adjusting the emphasis? I frankly just cannot decide because they're both brilliant. So without that emphasis, I'd be playing. I would never get the Bettermaker and the Maag combination to work as well as the Kirchhoff did without this emphasis section. There's the answer to your original question, is I can make almost anything work because of all the tonality options within this plugin, and especially with the attack and release time. I want to quickly go to the vocal here. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about it. This lead vocal here, I've got a sound on the lead vocal. And what I frequently do is parallel compression on the lead vocal to find a balance between not having to overdo compression on the vocal itself and endless amounts of automation, and balance that with a compressor in parallel that is set fairly aggressively. So I don't have to do aggressive amount of compression on the vocal. I can do a pretty good amount of compression on the parallel side, a heavier amount, and then balance these two so that I don't have to do, there's plenty of automation on this vocal. Don't get me wrong. I'm very big on automation, but not so much that you can never get it right. So it's a nice balance between consistency and then working the vocal with automation with purpose, as opposed to fixing problems with level. There's a very big difference between, and I'll play you something at the end here. I'm going to play this very last line, which is in some distortion as well, where you can hear the purposeful crescendo of this last line here, just to demonstrate what I mean by using automation as a creative tool, not as a fixing tool, which is why doing this in parallel works so well.
One second.
This set in parallel on the lead vocal. Again, I'm not splitting the bands here simply because the dynamic, the frequency range of the vocal is not all over the place. So let's just listen to the vocal and we'll go to a verse. Let's go to verse 2. I'm just going to bypass the parallel compression in and out so you can see and hear what it's doing.
An innocent child asks, what is the future past? Does anyone really know what time means? Too shall pass, fleeting photographs
not subtle. Nothing subtle about the consistency and the tonality that's happening here. You can see the emphasis that's going on here. I'm using some harmonic distortion. Again, it's a very minor amount. I'm using the transformer. I'm using the auto release to help glue those vocal lines together. And without it, I'd be spending a lot more time finding the tonality of this lead vocal and endless automation to fix the level problems on the lines, whereas putting this in there, it's
shall pass, fleeting photographs all to be.
doing lead vocals without some sort of parallel compression, and now it's this guy every single time for all the same reasons I'm doing it on the mix bus, is just absolutely critical. And just so you can see that I'm not overdoing the compression anywhere, so much so that automation isn't needed, because that's just not interesting to listen to. You can see the automation that's happening on here. That's basically all creative stuff as opposed to fixing level problems. That's all happening between what's happening on the track itself and with BX Glue in parallel. Let's go to one more quick example here so we can see some band splitting here. Here's BX Glue on this little fill situation that's Anthony programmed throughout the entire track. Snare, so we've got a much wider dynamic range and frequency response, which is where the band splitting comes in, so I can control the amount of low end that's being compressed as compared to the high end. It's not a ton here, not a ton is needed, but I can back off the low end. I've got a higher ratio, I've got a fast release time, and the two bands are making all of these drum fills work really well without having to do a ton of editing or a ton of clip gain or level automation. That's making all of these fills work great. Compression in the top end compression.
Hey, Craig.
Yes.
Just a quick note. Just got to wait for your mic to unmute before you.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
You can see it just in the corner. Just when your mic turns green, that means the auto mute's letting go. It's just the reverb tails are.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's all good.
What did we miss? Basically saying with the band split here, if you look here, you can see the difference of what's happening on the low end compression as compared to when the kick, it's basically an 808 kind of sound, and we're just getting the little snare roll. So it's a minor amount, but if I bypass it, we can hear what it's doing. That falls apart without it. Between the two. Before I put this in, I wish you could see how much time I spent trying to edit those little drum fills to try to get those to speak as well as they are right now. Remarkable.
Amazing.
All right.
Yeah,
Let's let me jump into Aura really quick, and then we're just going to get to the question and answers.
Sure. And while you're doing that, everybody, if you have questions, pop them in the chat in YouTube or in SessionWire, and I'll take note of them. And when Craig's done going through Aura, we'll answer as many questions as we can in the remaining time.
We won't spend forever on this. It's a reverb plugin that has a few different modes in it. On this huge snare in the end, I'm using this space, outer space. It's a big, beautiful, enveloping reverb that's making that snare drum huge. The snare itself, the one that Anthony actually gave me, has a little bit of reverb built onto the track itself. But when you add this on top of it, that is what is creating that massive, huge, beautiful snare that's only happening in this last hook. So we'll go play that real quick. I own every reverb plugin on the planet. I hate when these things sound like sales pitches because it's not meant to. Honestly, I have every reverb plugin ever made. Nothing is doing what that just did. Nothing else. And I tried everything. Amazing. Absolutely love it. Parameters, the typical kind of parameters is a low pass and high pass filter on the reverb itself. Pre-delay. The great thing about this pre-delay is that it's you can sync it to the tempo, so where the reverb starts can be exactly in time with the program material because of the tempo sync, size, the amount of decay, the multipliers of the low end and the high end. And then we also have saturation built into this plugin. You can put a gate on it if you needed to. It's not needed in this track. Again, just absolutely perfect. I also have it on the nylon string guitar, which also has some delay on it that was built in. But let's just play a hair of it on this as well, just to hear what it's doing to that nylon string guitar. Let's go here. Idea adding these kinds of reverbs.
One more time, Craig. One more time from the top. Your mic wasn't unmuted yet.
I can't see that, so that's part of why I keep forgetting.
All good.
Having that reverb built into this, that's got that beautiful, dreamy sound to it for a track. When you think about what this song is about, you can't not have a big, beautiful, dreamy reverb on a number of these things. Unfortunately, I'd like to play a hair more of that's like the first verb with some of the effects, especially these reverb effects, just so you can get an idea of how important what the lyric is saying and what the effects are doing and what the compression is doing on all these tracks. If you take it away, the mix it completely falls apart.
Falling stars from the sky, seen by a million eyes. What we perceive are only memories in time.
Just beautiful, beautiful stuff. I have a million tracks up here. There's probably 80 or 90 more tracks in this session. I'm using tons and tons of PA plugins throughout this entire mix. Unfortunately, we don't have time, but on this bass track, just real quickly, we've got the Vertigo, saturation, distortion, second harmonic, and third harmonic plugin on here. Not subtly adjusted, but when you take it away, the aggression in the top end of that bass track just goes away. Black Box is working on this pulse track down here, a synth track, and I'm automating the Kirchhoff in here, and we'll just play this one last thing before we get into other questions. If we pull this up, I'm automating high end on the ends of these phrases to make them come out in between vocal lines, just to bring interest into the song. We can just watch that happen. attention to where what's happening in between these vocal lines. Did I do it again?
You did it again.
Okay. Let's just listen to this where this automation is happening in between these vocal lines so we can feel the importance of this automation. Black box is adding some of the grit to it, and the EQ change is making this little pulse thing important in between the vocal lines.
The thrill and the pain for what will remain, all is to be so temporary. No.
All right. I think we need to get into question and answers.
I think so. I mean, this has been incredibly informative. Got a few questions. Anybody else have questions, please drop them in the chats. I've got a couple we're going to go over really quick. Got about 15 minutes here, 20 minutes tops. Angelo asks, how much space are you leaving for the parallel comp on the vocals? Do you make the lead vocal a bit quieter on purpose to add the parallel compression too?
Because parallel is additive, as opposed to, see, if I put it on the track, then I'd be adjusting the wet-dry balance. And I like to think of wet-dry balance on a track as subtractive, not additive, because you're obviously have to do that balance. Whereas vocals, there, and then it's the full amount, 100% wet. And so the balance, so the parallel compression is being added to the vocal without any fully wet, and it's always additive. In this particular case, the amount of where the level of the return is compared to the level of the vocal, it's a little unusual in this particular case because of the subtlety of this performance. The return is actually just a hair hotter than the actual vocal itself. Typically, they'd be equal or maybe even a little bit less on the return. But as long as it's additive and it's providing the right amount of glue to the vocal without having to do endless riding or clip gating, it's doing the right thing. And then you add in the tonality benefits of what glue is doing, and there's nothing else that would work in the same exact way.
Amazing.
Did that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, all of these are such deep topics that we could spend hours talking about each one. Juno the Mix asks, is that the only thing on the vocal send, or do you add other things as far as the aura goes?
Oh boy, if you only knew how many things from an effect. There's, it's the only thing providing any other dynamic control. I think I have 8 or 9 different reverb and types of reverb trails and delays, providing all those spacey effects and different, and it changes from the bridge and various spots in the verses, and then there's a different delay that happens on the hooks that provide that different space. It's lots and lots of different things that's providing the sound of this vocal.
And are you using automation on the individual tracks or the master track? So I guess in terms of
all the automation is on the sends. I think that's the question, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? I can show you.
Sure.
Let me open up sends here. I hear a baby.
Yep. I've got to press my mute button here.
Here, look at how many things are being. There's a doubler. There's 2 or 3 different reverbs, 2 or 3 different delays, and then we can just go in and look at like these verse echoes. This is the send. So you can see these various spots where that send is just being added to add those delays that sound so cool in those spots. Okay. What else do we have in terms of talking about BX Glue or other plugins here as opposed to my mixing stuff? When it comes to like mixing these kind of things, the workshops that I do that talk about strictly mixing techniques are a good place to join there, and we talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, and be sure, everybody give Craig a follow on Instagram. He's always posting about workshops that he's doing. Hit his website up. You can sign up for the workshops that he does host.
And it's constant. It's constant mixing tips with a good amount of sarcasm sprinkled in on various topics.
As it should be.
Yeah.
Juno the Mix asks, do you time box yourself when mixing? And if so, how much time do you personally spend on mixing these days? And I know this is going to be this is a good answer. It's going to be good.
I spend more time on a mix than you could possibly imagine. Average is at least a day and a half on the mix, then leaving it up overnight, and then making final tweaks the next day, and then making more final tweaks a day or two later, and then making the endless tweaking. And I don't send a mix to a client until after I've lived with it overnight and make a set of tweaks, and then the revision process happens. But there's a lot of mixers, and I'm not going to mention any names whatsoever, that like to portray this idea that they do mixes in 4 to 6 hours, which, knowing those mixes and who they're for and what they sound like, is utter BS. So anyone who tells you that pro mixers do mixes in 4 to 6 hours is lying their freaking ass off to sound like they're some kind of genius. It doesn't work that way. I'm sorry to say.
That's what I knew it was going to be a good answer. I love that. Jochen, have to apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly if that's not how you pronounce it. He asks, or she asks, I always found the distortion on BX Aura not usable for me. What is the purpose to distort the reverb?
Let's pull it up and see. Are we talking about the drive? Is that what we're talking about?
I'm assuming, yeah.
I am a man of subtlety. So if you haven't already noticed, it's all this little amount of incremental stuff across a number of tracks that provide the sound of my mixes. There's no general answer to that question other than you can plainly see I'm not using it here. I'm more likely, I don't know that I'm completely disagreeing. It's a tonal thing that I'm sure definitely has uses in places. In this particular mix, where I'm using any kind of saturation, the saturation is happening on the track, which then gets transferred into the reverb itself anyway. So to do it independently is just a complete, just totally dependent on the sound that you're going for, and whether or not you find it useful is, that's part of the creative process. There's no technical answer to that question.
Yeah, it's everything's so subjective.
So the intention behind that feature is that it is meant to be more of something used subtly to create somewhat of like a vintage reverb effect, very kind of smooth harmonic saturation, nothing too over the top. I mean, you could definitely use it creatively and turn it up all the way, but yeah, it's intended to be more of a subtle effect.
Hey, Charles, can you spend, before we go on with any more questions, just a few minutes talking about what's going on in the Maag EQ? And I'm going to be right back.
Would love to.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So yeah, this is the Maag Audio EQ4 MS. You might be familiar with the Maag Audio EQ4. It's one of our top-selling plugins, and people go for that particular plugin when they're looking to add some top-end shimmer, some top-end gleam, thanks to the airband, and you're able to set it up in a way where you turn the gain of that band up and avoid a lot of harshness. So you might use it on vocals, you might use it on electric or acoustic guitars, drum overheads, anything where you really want to aggressively boost it without introducing that kind of like shrill, top end harmonic content. Specifically with this plugin here, if you're trying to get that sound what you can do is choose one of those higher airband frequency settings, really crank it up, and then you can kind of dial back any harshness that comes out of that by turning down the 2.5 kilohertz gain control. So up at the top row, you have all of your gain controls. These are going to affect the level of each band. In total, you have 6 bands to choose from. One of the main differences between the EQ4 and the EQ4 MS is that you now have control over the left and right channel, or the mid and side channel. So there's some more detailed control in that sense. And then what's different on top of that is that you also have these bandwidth controls below and center frequency switches. So on their own, it's like, okay, cool. There's some added features. We have this Brainworks toolbar at the bottom where there's TMT, Monomaker. But what's happening under the hood of this plugin is actually quite interesting. So when you load the plugin in its default state, you're going to have this relatively linear response. But as soon as you start making changes to the bandwidths or the center frequencies of the bands, it's actually going to produce this nonlinear response. So let's say the response looks like this. It's sort of like a flat line if you're picturing an EQ curve. As soon as you make an adjustment to, let's say, the low mid band, you might all of a sudden get like a hump in the frequency response like this without even touching the gain controls at all. So just by flicking these switches, you're going to end up with these very musical sounding curves, which is pretty unique. And sort of the workflow that you might want to take with this particular plugin once you get your hands on it is pick your center frequencies, pick your bandwidths, and then start twisting the gain control knobs. And in my experience, it's a little easier to dial in the sound that you're looking for that way. Because after the fact, if you're switching center frequencies and even just adjusting the bandwidths, it's really going to affect the shape of the EQ's response. And then I think the other unique feature here is that there's a soft clipper built in, which can help add a little more, what's the right word? A little more sauce to the sound, which is fun. Yeah. So that's sort of a brief overview of the plugin. We'll have a full walkthrough video coming out that dives into audio examples and goes through all the features more in depth. But yeah, the big thing here is the non-linear response of the EQ that's possible by just simply switching the switches on there. It's very unique.
I wish you and I had that conversation before I started working. that would have helped. That would have helped. All right, back to some questions before we call it a day here.
Yeah, a couple of questions. And just before we dive into those, I do want to mention somebody's asking in the YouTube stream, how do I learn techniques to properly make commercially competitive music the right way? I mean, Plugin Alliance is a great resource. They do mix. What is it? Mega Mix. What's the series called?
Mix with Mega. Mix
with Mega. So go sign up for Plugin Alliance. Dig in, get a Mega subscription, get all the plugins, watch those series. I will also mention that SessionWire, if you sign up for a SessionWire Studio subscription, you also get access to PureMix Pro. So you can go over to PureMix and watch all of the videos with Grammy Award-winning mix engineers mixing anything, really, any style of music. And I put a discount code in the chat for 30% off the first year of a SessionWire Studio subscription. So go find resources online. YouTube, Plugin Alliances, Mix with Mega, PureMix Pro. There's all kinds of resources out there. Go learn from the best. Just needed to say that because, everything's at your fingertips these days.
Well, finding good information is important because there's plenty of horrible information on Instagram.
Yes, there is.
Listen to pros and not to average guys who don't have mixed credits.
Yeah.
And endless information that I watch and go, no.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw one the other day real quickly where I don't know who it was, someone talking about doing 30 dB of gain reduction on a vocal to make it sit in a mix. And
nice.
Someone watching here told me that, and I'm like, he's like, is that real? And I'm like, where did you find that? He's like, oh, it's some Instagram account that has a ton of followers, which were probably bought. And I'm like, 30 dB of gain reduction on a vocal.
It's a sound. It's a sound.
Not a good one.
It's a sound. I will mention the discount code that I'm going to put is for people that have not previously had a Session Wire subscription. So if you're already on one, that discount code is not going to work for you, unfortunately. It's for first-time purchases. Okay, somebody wants to know if you ever use channel strips.
Infrequently.
Why?
That is an excellent question. I don't know that I have a great answer to that question. Other than my workflow has always been built around plugins that perform a very specific function that I've had better luck with. I don't even think it's luck. You have to remember, I go back to the analog world where there was tons of outboard gear. In fact, lots of outboard gear that Plugin Alliance plugins emulates. So because of how long I've been doing this, I've never really thought about doing it any other way other than finding the thing that I need for a particular use and going that route. I'm not saying that can't work or doesn't work. It's just not been part of my general workflow.
Would you say that, and this is kind of more this is a question for me. I see videos of people like, Chris Lord Algae mixing on an SSL and, doing all this crazy stuff. And the thought that always comes to my mind is like, yeah, okay, he gets everything recorded perfectly to him in the first place. So what he's doing is kind of like finishing touches. Would you say that most of the material that you get is the same? You're already getting it where it's been recorded through an actual channel strip or recorded a specific way?
Depends on whether it's who recorded it, what kind of an artist, if it's a major label artist or an independent artist. And for better or worse, the fact that now everyone with a computer has access to anything, I can't say that has improved the sound of lots of stuff that we all get.
Right.
It's great that people have access to everything, but there's lots of, learning engineering, learning music production, learning mixing, learning mastering is a process. And each one of those things is a lifelong endeavor, each one of them. And that's not this, not to give people who want to do it all a hard time, but I think everyone just needs to be a little bit realistic of how long it takes to become an expert at any one of those things, yet alone 5 of them. So I will say this, if your goal is to be an artist and you want to be a songwriter and or producer, the idea of being the songwriter, the lyricist, the producer, the mixer, the mastering engineer, and then an expert marketer and content creator, I'm sorry to say, is not realistic. All these major label artists that you want to be like and you want to have that kind of career, I promise you Taylor Swift is not mixing her own records. We all know who is, and it's the best in the business with the most track record, #1 hits of anyone on the planet, and is basically invisible to the world. I think he's part of the Illuminati because no one ever sees or hears from him. So, and he's also making 10 grand to mix. So I think having some sort of reality when it comes to how many things you can be an expert at is very different than learning all these skills so that you know how to communicate with these people. Understanding plugins, understanding all this process is absolutely critical so that you can communicate with the rest of your team in a proper way. So I'm no way saying forget all this. I'm saying learn it and then rely on a team.
Love it. Amazing. Tolumide says preach. if anybody else has any last questions, please drop them in the chat really quick. Otherwise, we're going to kind of slowly wrap things up here. Is there anything else you want to touch on, Craig, before we...
No, I think, like I said, I could go on for hours and hours, and I actually really enjoy doing this. I enjoy teaching this stuff. I think people are dying to learn and dying to get great information. There's some great information out there, and there's lots of horrible information out there. I'm going to give my one last sales. This is a sales pitch. I have been with Plugin Alliance since the very beginning. The bulk of my mixes are based around Plugin Alliance products, which isn't to say that obviously everything in a mix is all Plugin Alliance. They know that. But the bulk of what I do is based around Plugin Alliance plugins. They have the most stuff. They have the best sounding stuff. And I would absolutely dig into that. There's so much information. They provide an incredible amount of educational material that you cannot find elsewhere. And you just heard it from Charles, the amount of knowledge that goes into these things. I don't know the first thing about coding plugins, and I can't imagine. I'm just amazed that you can do what you can with some of these products. There is my sales pitch.
Awesome.
And unless anyone has any questions, I think we need to call it for today.
Yeah, well, I'll tag on to that. So be sure to check out the Plugin Alliance website. Like I said, mega bundles. I mean, it's a subscription. You get every plugin, depending on the level of mega subscription you're on. Get to work. Try them out. Get your hands on them. Listen to them. Be sure to check out Craig's website. Go check out his, he does mix consults as well. So if you're working on a mix and you need a pair of well-trained ears and a, really, really expensive listening room to have a listen to it and, give you some...
For those that don't know, I'm in a Northward Acoustics room, which I wish you all could hear one, because the problem with it is when you do, there's no going back to anything else. So maybe you shouldn't hear one, because... and I will say that once again, I'm going to repeat that Anthony is one of the most talented producers on the planet. So if you need someone to collaborate with, that is a call you will never regret making. Brendan is an unbelievable drummer and also for a hire. So there's our personal sales pitches. Thank you, Plugin Alliance. I know how much effort you guys have put into making this happen. It has been no small feat. It has been no small amount of time. So I want to say I appreciate you guys, and I'm always here for that. And with that, I think we've said it all.
I think we have. Anthony, where can people find you? If you want to unmute your phone, where can they find you?
AnthonyJResta.com, and then on Instagram, I'm anthony.j.resta.
Awesome. And Charles, thanks for joining. Where can people find you?
I'll just plug Plugin Alliance here. Plugin-alliance.com.
Exactly. Yeah. Hit up Plugin Alliance. Hit up SessionWire as well. Send us an email. We're more than happy to chat and hoping to do more of these types of things in the future. It's been a great hang. Thanks, everybody, for dropping in. We will see you in the next one. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Thanks again.
Take care.
Bye-bye.